And it is now time for us to talk about our main event of the evening, UFC 253, just around the corner, and we have got ourselves probably one of the most eagerly anticipated title fights for a long, long time. Israel Adesanya, the champion, makes the second defence of his belt up against the number 2 seed Paulo Costa. Adesanya 19-0, Paulo Costa 13-0, which makes this the first time that two male undefeated fighters have fought for a title since Lyoto Machida versus Rashad Evans. So we're talking about a good 11 or 12 years.
Wow, that's an incredible statistic.
I mean, there were a couple of women's fights which happened afterwards. I think Ronda versus Holly was two unbeaten fighters, and Ronda versus Betch as well. But this is the first time two male fighters, unbeaten fighters, have fought for a title.
Ronda versus Bash, a legendary fight. Yeah, but that's a great statistic. It just shows how high level this fight is. I mean, we were complaining a little earlier about Garbrandt not even being ranked, not even fought at 125, and he's getting a title shot. This is a rare chance where we had the actual number 1 and 2 middleweight in the UFC going at it head to head. Incredible fight. I'm looking forward to this one so much. I think that this is going to get a lot of casual attention from people. I think that people who don't watch fights. I think a lot of my friends who don't watch fights know Israel Adesanya. They see him on Instagram. They see him in highlight reels. He's got that it factor. And Paulo Costa, a handsome guy, the most jacked dude on the entire roster, the most physical specimen looking guy on the whole roster. I think he beats Yoel Romero for that at this point. So this is going to get a lot of attention. It's going to be an incredible fight. Can't wait for it, in my opinion. And so I'll let you take the lead on this one too, Carlos. Give me your first initial thoughts on this one.
Well, I'm going to start off first and foremost by talking about Israel Adesanya. Now, obviously, we talk about the job he's done in the UFC. We have had, I think he's had 8 fights in the UFC. 6 of those have had performance bonuses, either fight and night performances or performance of the night bonuses. So the guy is a very entertaining fighter. He knows how to get the job done. That being said, though, I think it was the first time since probably the Marvin Vettori fight we saw a couple of weaknesses when it comes to Adesanya in Yoel Romero. Not so much in terms of what Yoel was bringing to Adesanya, but that Izzy just seemed to have no understanding of how to find his openings. Obviously, if you've got a guy in Romero who's not giving you anything to bite on, you can't really do anything with that. And of course, Paulo Costa, his last fight was also against Romero, and he found a lot more success in dealing with that fighting style than what Izzy did. So I'm going to be interested to see in how Adesanya can bounce back, because Izzy's an entertainer. Izzy enjoys putting on a show for the fans. And I think it hurt him a lot that he got so much criticism for the performance against Yoel.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, it's a great point about how they matched up against Romero. And yeah, what you said, he didn't have anything to react on. Israel's game is based on feints and it's based on reactions from his opponents. But when that stoic Yoel Romero is sitting there with the high guard and just marching, doing that defensive stance, sometimes he was standing completely still in the fight. I mean, it was a crazy fight to watch. Yeah, he just had no reactions to go off of. So Israel was confused. He didn't really know what to do. And Paulo Costa, on the other hand, was just like, I'm just throwing volume. I'm going balls to the wall. Just an insane back and forth rounds 1 and 2. I mean, some of the most competitive and exciting striking rounds in UFC history, those first 2 rounds of the fight. I still see people giving the rounds to Paulo, to Yoel. They're going different ways. Personally, I did score it, how the judges scored it. Rounds 1 and 2 to Costa, round 3 to Romero. But I think we can learn a lot about that fight from Costa. So do you think that Costa's win against Romero was more proved himself more, or do you think it kind of gave you more concerns for this matchup with Israel, Carl?
I think a little bit of both. I think that Costa had a fighting style which was dealt with Yoel Romero a lot better than what Adesanya did. But it's a blessing and a curse when it comes to Paulo Costa, because Paulo's fighting style relies on backing people up against the fence and just teeing off on them. I've sort of compared him. Compared him to sort of like a young Vanderlei, because Vanderlei has that big wild swinging style. He liked to back people up as well, and he found a lot of success against Romero doing that, and he's done so in all of his fights, whether it's Uriah Hall or Bamboze or I think it was Gareth McClellan he fought in his debut. Um, but that sort of hands down wild style opens you up to a lot of counters, and that's where Israel Adesanya shines.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I enjoy Costa's fighting style. It has had a lot of success. He needs to iron out that side of his game if he wants to try and get Adesanya out of there. Because if he tries going down, hands down, big wild swings, he's going to get caught.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem that he faces in this fight is he's never fought a guy who can counterpunch, who can evade his strikes like Israel is going to. And when we've seen guys like Uriah Hall, throw a jab, have some footwork, have some defensive boxing. I mean, he struggled. I think he got rocked a little bit in that Uriah Hall fight with maybe just a glancing punch behind the ear, but he looked a little hurt there. He got dropped briefly versus Yoel Romero, so. I just see Paulo Costa as an offensively minded fighter. I mean, he it has incredible offense. I mean, his striking can't be taken lightly. I think Dan Hardy called him, a power lifter in terms of his striking a few months back, and I do think that that is pretty disrespectful and just inaccurate. I mean, the guy has great skills when it comes to striking. He throws punches and combinations. He has great body kicks. He cuts off the cage with the body kicks. So he'll throw those big punch combinations, and if against the cage like you were talking about, and if you try going one way or the other, he will fire off those body kicks to stop you from being able to escape. I mean, that's high level stuff. That's not just pure power and aggression. He does have layers to his striking. It's a shame for him, though. He's running into the most layered striker in the sport of MMA in Israel Adesanya. The guy can just fight in so many different ways, moving backwards, counterpunching, leading, going forward. I mean, he really just does it all. And that's why I think that Costa struggles in this fight. I think the first few rounds will be really close when Costa has all of his energy, all of his cardio. He's going to be throwing out tremendous volume in those first two rounds. But I do think we see Israel countering. We're going to see him using his footwork to stay off the cage. We're going to see Israel probably landing the harder punches of the two. We're going to see Costa swarming those long combinations. Maybe some punches land, but I think that Israel will be landing cleaner. Now, when I envision this fight, I do see it going into the later rounds, the third and fourth rounds, and I do think that Israel starts to take over in those rounds when Costa's cardio slows down. But I think that Costa's cardio is a bit unknown, right? We've only seen him in round three one time in his career, and it was in an incredibly high-paced fight. I mean, he must have landed 60 strikes in the first two rounds each of that Yoel Romero fight. So it's not unexpected that he would gas out in round three, and it's not like he was completely. I mean, he was putting his hands on his hips and very tired, but he still did land 44 significant strikes in round four. So it's not like he was completely gassed out. But I think the cardio is a big concern. What are you thinking about the cardio of Paulo Costa, Carl?
I was very concerned by what I saw in the third round against Yoel Romero. I mean, Yoel's cardio management is a lot better than what Costa's is. So we've seen Yoel go 25 minutes before. I think that's always been one of his strengths as a fighter. And we saw that when he fought Paulo Costa. I think Costa won the first round. I think he won the first half of the second round. But from that point on, it was all Romero. And again, it was a fast-paced fight. And he was fighting against somebody who was also trying to push the pace, which is something Adesanya's not going to do. But if we start seeing that kind of fast pace of a fight again, and Costa starts tiring, because you've got to remember as well, Costa is a big, muscular dude. He carries a lot of bulk. If he tries doing that in the second and third round against someone like Adesanya, who is going to latch on every single loose hand, it's going to be easy play for Adesanya. But Costa is so strong early on. And it's that question, can Adesanya avoid those big haymakers in the first 2 minutes of the fight?
Yeah, and I mean, I do think he does avoid them. I think that Paulo can make it close though. If he just conserves his gas tank a little bit more than he did in that Yoel Romero fight. I did check the stats. He landed 37 strikes in both of the first two rounds of the Romero fight. So 74 strikes in 2 rounds. That's just such a high pace. If he tones it down a little bit, kind of like we were talking about with Reyes earlier, if he controls himself, his volume a little more, I think he could make this fight competitive for 3 or 4 rounds instead of for 1 or 2. But no matter how I see the early fight going, I just see Israel taking over. Unless Costa is able to knock him out in those first 2 rounds, I see the experience, the cardio advantage coming out in those later rounds, and Israel's going to start to take over. Talking about the 5 round experience for these guys again, this is Paulo Costa's first 5 round fight, the first time he's actually been scheduled for 5 rounds. Meanwhile, Israel Adesanya has been scheduled for 5 rounds in 4 of his past 6 fights, and we've actually seen him go the full distance 3 of those times. So that's just such an advantage. We've seen him in rounds 4 and 5. We've seen him carry power late into the fight. I mean, look at the Kelvin Gastelum fight. He was dropping Kelvin and hurting him and had him near finished. After a 25-minute grueling back and forth fight, he still had that cardio late in the fight. And I think that that's why I'm picking Israel Adesanya by late finish instead of by decision. I initially was thinking, oh, Costa might be tough enough to make it to the full decision. Maybe Israel doesn't have that power to finish him, but when you look at the power that he carried late into that fight and just how sharp he is in those late rounds and the cardio fall off that I expect Costa to have, I do think we see a late finish from Israel Adesanya. So in terms of an official prediction, I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya by fourth round TKO. But I'm not discrediting Costa. I think that in terms of a pre-fight bet in this one, I do think that I would rather be betting on Paulo Costa as the underdog here because, in my opinion, rounds 1 and 2 are going to be the closest rounds of the fight. And if Paulo Costa wins, he's either going to win those rounds or win by knockout in those rounds. So if you want to bet Israel Adesanya in this fight, I would say stay away from the pre-fight money line and look to live bet him about 7 to 10 minutes through this fight if you have access to live betting. If you don't, I would honestly recommend passing on Israel Adesanya because he does have a chance to lose this fight early. But if he survives that early storm, if he gets through the first 7 or 10 minutes, I think that Israel Adesanya will be a great live bet if the odds are good. So I will be looking to live bet Israel Adesanya here, and the official prediction for me is going to be Israel by fourth round TKO. So I'll pass it back to you, Carl. I'm sorry I've been talking for the past few minutes.
Saves me. I've got an awful speaking voice anyway, so probably doing me a favour. You touched on something there as well with the Kelvin Gastelum fight. Adesanya has had experience of handling adversity because Kelvin gave him a lot of problems. Obviously, he rocked him in the first round, rocked him in the fourth round as well, and he managed to come back and get the job done. Costa's faced adversity as well, but he's never faced it at that sort of high level, high stakes. We saw Uriah Hall catch him coming in, rock him. And then, of course, there was Yoel Romero fight. How is he going to handle it if Adesanya does properly catch him and crack him? How is he going to respond to that? And in my opinion, from what I've seen, I have a lot of question marks about it. I mean, even Johnny Hendricks was causing Costa issues in that first round. So I sort of question how Costa's going to handle it if he does get that big shot.
Yeah, I agree with the adversity thing. I mean, really, the most adversity he's faced was probably the jab of Uriah Hall and in round 3 of Costa, or round 3 of Romero. And Romero was, landing hard and going for the big kill, but I mean, although it doesn't sound right to say, even because Romero has so many round 3 knockouts, but he sometimes doesn't carry the power late into the fight. It seemed like that fight he was pretty much pure volume in those later rounds. He didn't have the power to knock out Costa, and I do think that Costa is going to be insanely durable. I think that. I don't have any problem with saying that I think that he's on steroids. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I think that fighters should be allowed to, honestly, but that's beside the point. I think that it's undeniable that Costa is just juiced up on everything. And I think that sometimes we see those guys show insane durability, like Davison Figueiredo, just an insanely durable guy, another similar type of guy. I shouldn't go off with my theories too much about Costa. I don't want to discredit him at all because I have a ton of respect for the guy, but I do have a feeling he's going to show insane durability and just eat some massive shots like the punches that knocked out Robert Whittaker. I think he might eat some of them and go later into the fight, but eventually the power and volume of Israel will succumb, and he will eventually get finished in those later rounds. What are you thinking for in terms of an official prediction for this one?
If the fight's going to finish early, it's going to be a Costa knockout. If it goes to the third round, the longer this fight goes on, I favour Adesanya. I think Adesanya can get it done in the third round.